this morning I'm here with Dr John Chopin, reproduction specialist. John's from Chopin Equine Reproduction Services in the beautiful Hunter Valley, and today we're talking about stallion reproduction and stallion management. So John, take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. As equine reproduction vets, we spend a lot of our time concentrating on mares, and 50% of the equation is with stallions, and it's an area that we don't really get to spend a lot of time on.
So John, obviously we're here in the Hunter Valley, which is famous for thoroughbred breeding. Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit about the thoroughbred industry in relation to stallion management?
The stallions in the Hunter Valley either are resident stallions or shuttle stallions, so they'll either stay in the Hunter Valley all year round, or they might travel to the Northern Hemisphere to have the Northern Hemisphere season as well. Some of those stallions will work a lot. They'll have a huge book of mares, and that can take some careful management with the numbers and the spacings and breeding frequencies. As veterinarians, we typically don't become involved in that too much unless there's a problem. A lot of that is managed by the farms themselves, by experienced breeding managers. But certainly when there's a problem, quite often we can help get involved in trying to assess those horses, trying to assess their work capacity, their frequency of use, and help to manage those stallions so that we still continue to get useful pregnancies. So I suppose my take-home message is that if you're looking at maybe standing a stallion for the first time, you've got a problem with a stallion that you're worried about, but certainly consulting with your veterinarian can help to assess that horse, work out what his work capacity may be for a young horse, for a first season sire, or if you've got a horse that you don't think is performing well, that your veterinarian can certainly help get involved to assess the work capacity of that horse, so that you can work out a breeding schedule and then a yearly book of mares for that stallion. I suppose the main problem we see stallions for is infertility. Now that can either be infectious, so the stallion has picked up an organism that has caused an infectious problem, and that can be either from the mare typically, or can just occur from other reasons, and certainly that can really impact on that stallion's season. Also, these things, if they are infectious, have the potential to be spread to mares, so can cause mare problems as well. As a routine, certainly in the Hunter Valley, we regularly screen both mares and occasionally stallions to rule out some of the more common infectious causes of infertility. But if there is a problem, and infection is obviously a potential rule out to make sure that that's not the cause of the problem. The other sources of infertility can vary. If they're non-infectious, they can be age-related, they can be injury-related, or sometimes we don't actually get a diagnosis and they're called idiopathic. But they can be a cause of concern because sometimes they can be permanent, sometimes they just reduce the work capacity of the horse, and sometimes they completely eliminate the horse's ability to work at all. And they can be difficult to treat, difficult to manage, and certainly getting advice for those is critical to manage what's left of that stallion's work capacity. Certainly the issue of shuttle stallions is interesting. There's been a lot of work done on shuttle stallions and the management that we put them through and whether or not it affects their capacity to work. The interesting thing is that we probably all know that horses are seasonal breeders, that they breed in late spring, early summer, or through to late summer. And I suppose most people involved with horses realise that with mares, but probably aren't as aware that it affects stallions as well. So part of the critical management of these shuttle stallions is to never actually let them know that they're going into winter, so that they're always in that late spring, summer phase of reproduction. And that can be really difficult to manage. Climate control, so temperature, hours of daylight that they perceive, all of that cannot change when they swap hemispheres on long flights, etc. So it can be difficult to manage. Sometimes though, their own inherent rhythms will kick in anyway, and so we may see that in a season, that we have a shuttle stallion that's been doing well for 2 or 3 periods, and then has a real down phase and that is just its own inherent cycles kicking in to induce a winter period of reduced capacity before it then goes back up into a summer period. I suppose if we now look at stallions in artificial breeding technologies, the emphasis really changes. It's now the stallion that becomes more the focus than the mare. We now are able to accurately and intimately assess the semen quality of these horses. We put that stuff through testing, we put it through processing, to package it in various forms to send out to mares either on a farm or across the country or even international boundaries. So when we talk about managing stallions in an artificial breeding sense, it becomes much more involved, much more intense, much more intimate with the stallion. For instance, one of the many ways that a horse can be used for artificial breeding is artificial insemination, whether that's fresh on farm, whether it's chilled, so it can be transported then across state boundaries and sometimes even international boundaries, depending on the time that it takes to get to its destination. And then obviously frozen semen as well, which has an indefinite life if it's looked after properly, and then can also travel international boundaries because there's no set time limit that we've got to fulfill or meet. So the stallions are then used, the semen is collected, it's assessed, and then it's processed and packaged. Now that process will vary depending on whether we are using it for fresh insemination, whether we're using it for chilled, or whether we're using it for frozen. If we use stallions for fresh insemination, so artificial insemination on farm, the semen is collected, it's measured both in volume, concentration and motility, and what we're looking for is the total number of motile sperm. With that, we can determine an insemination dose based on previous use of that stallion, or just make a best guess depending on what most stallions are used to, and then we can divide that into that total number he's provided us with to go and work out how many mares we can inseminate on that day. And that does increase the breeding potential of that stallion for that day, that we can split it up into smaller doses. So instead of that ejaculate going into one mare in one breeding, we can collect that and we can divide it into smaller doses and put it into more mares. If we're using it for chilled transport, what we will do is much the same process, except instead of just putting it with a simple extender and putting it into the mare, we'll put it into an extender that might be designed for chilled transport. We will then package it into a special container that will cool it down at a good rate, preserve it for 24-48 hours so that it can reach its destination, and that way a stallion can stay on a particular farm and mare owners, mare breeders can order that semen and it can be delivered to their door, to their farm, to use in that mare on the day that they wish to use it. Okay. So the advantages and disadvantages with that system, the advantages are that a stallion can be used potentially over more mares than they might be able to be used for with natural service. Another advantage is that that stallion can be accurately monitored. If that stallion does have a fertility problem, he can be accurately monitored because his semen has been collected and assessed every time. Other advantages, especially for mare owners, is that they don't have to send their mares away. And say especially they have a mare that might have special needs, they might have a mare in foal, they might be worried about the foal travelling, might be worried about that foal being managed on another farm. So they can keep that mare and foal at home, they can keep it in an environment that they're happy with and get that semen delivered to them to use in the mare. The disadvantages with the system is that it does require more intense involvement. So you have technicians and you have veterinary involvement, and that's going to cost money. The other disadvantages are that there may be some restrictions associated with certain breeds. For instance, the thoroughbreds will not allow any form of artificial breeding technology to be used. A lot of the other breeds are quite happy with the lower end, the less intense uses, but maybe more restricted with the higher end things like embryo transfer and embryo and cloning, that sort of thing. The other main disadvantage, I suppose, is that the costs will increase because of the increased intervention. However, often that is offset by costs that won't be incurred from transport and mere agistment at another farm. So looking at that balance, most people will offset those costs for agistment, transport, maybe disease or injury that may occur out of their control, and may find that the costs involved in using their veterinarian may actually be equivalent or even lower in some circumstances. So other forms of artificial breeding that are possible, apart from, if we're looking at artificial insemination, which is that tree out of fresh, chilled, frozen, from there the next most common source of artificial breeding technology is embryo transfer. Embryo transfer is used a lot in some industries. The idea with embryo transfer is that you can take a young embryo from a mare and put it into another mare for her to nurture and develop that in a uterus and then foal out, and the genetics are exactly the same. The mother's only been a surrogate uterus and then obviously a milk bar once the foal is born. The advantages with that system are that you can have a mare who may not either be able to carry a pregnancy, still produce young. You may have a mare that's in competition or performance, and you don't want her to be restricted in that activity by being pregnant, so you'll get someone else to carry, or another horse to carry her pregnancy. The other advantage is that you can increase the breeding capacity of a mare so that she may have multiple, or produce multiple foals in a season to completely different size even, to increase the genetic production from that particular individual. Cloning is another area that is probably really cutting edge, and it's not widely used, mainly because of its expense and the expertise that is involved. The areas that it has been used is probably mainly with males, where we've either got what's perceived as an exceptional individual, that its genetics are worth carrying on, may have reached an age where he is either incapable of being used, or maybe infertile, or may even be close to dying or dead, and those genetics have been preserved and then cloned into a new individual who's exactly the same, but is then able to carry on the genetics of the original copy. The other scenario that has been used is with geldings that obviously were gelded early in their career. They became exceptional athletes, and then it's been perceived that if they wanted to carry on the genetics of that particular individual, you can actually clone that individual and produce an entire male, which can then go on and breed and carry on the genetics of that gelding. In females, the cloning, there are a few issues with the cloning. The main problem is that there's a tricky little organelle in the cell called the mitochondria, and it has its own set of genetics that do go down the female line. Put simply, is when we clone females, we may not get the exact replication of genetic material that we do with males. Males don't contribute mitochondria. All your mitochondria come from your female. And part of the cloning process is that we use a donor oocyte, a donor egg, from a completely unrelated, you may not even know the female that it's come from, and that female is going to contribute the mitochondrial DNA for that line. So there is a bit of a discussion as to whether or not female cloning is going to be as successful as male, and probably may not be due to that mitochondrial DNA issue. I'd have to say the one question that probably vexes me most is when I've had a mare that everything has gone normally. The semen quality, where I've been able to assess it, has been good, or we've used a stallion with good fertility. Timing wise, she's done absolutely everything right. Post-mating or post-insemination, there's been no problems. Everything's gone off really well. and then she turns up not pregnant. And the client, says, why isn't my mare pregnant? And you say, well, look, the semen quality was good, she did everything right, there were no problems post mating or post insemination, but she just didn't get pregnant. And quite often the comment will be, well, gee, she's gone pregnant every other time. I suppose it's a problem that really vexes us, is that we can't always visualise what's happening at a microscopic level inside the mare, or even inside the stallion sometimes. And so we know from various amounts of surveys that have been done that you can breed mares of normal fertility to stallions of normal fertility, and some of them will just not go in foal. Now that may be just on that particular cycle. If you breed them again the next cycle, or maybe even the third cycle, they will go in foal. But it's interesting that even sometimes where we've had normal mares that have been bred 4 times to a particular stallion, and then you suddenly change stallions, they go straight in foal. Now I can't answer that one. I don't know whether sometimes there may be on a molecular level, there may be incompatibilities, and you change genetics and suddenly everything works. But to me, that's probably the most vexing problem I have, is answering clients with that question: why didn't my normal mare go in foal?
Well, that's Stallion Reproduction with Dr John Chopin. So thanks very much, John.
No worries, thanks.
No worries.